The initial questions that you ask when you're trying to analyze or deconstruct are super, super important. And the thing is, you start with questions whether you realize it or not. So it's very, very crucial to make sure that you're asking the right questions and making sure that you're very aware of the questions that you're asking. It's definitely way too often that people that try to analyze games come down with questions like, sure, so a lot of people like this game, but is it actually good? Or, oh, not a lot of people like this game, but I'm here to tell you that it is good, or whatever it is. And it's a little bit strange because they're starting with this weird question by saying, is it good? And they are doing one thing that's very correct, which is separating what they consider good with what they personally like. And that's definitely a correct approach because if you don't separate those things, you'll tend to conflate them. We're very biased, and that's just a result of being human, and we're not very good at thinking clearly and objectively about things. But when we try, it's really important to understand that because otherwise you fall into the trap that most people do. What most people will do is they'll make an attempt to be more objective by saying, well, we're going to decide if this game is even good, or if it's better than this thing, or if this component of it is better than this thing. And you'll end up coming down with these conclusions of things like, oh, well, this game is good because it has good level design and good puzzle design and good story. But it's not really different. You're using basically the same words to refer to the same concept because if you say good level design, good story, good puzzle design, you're still not being super specific because your criteria is it good, which is completely poorly defined. And the problem with these sorts of discussions is that they start with criteria that doesn't really mean anything. What is good? What is bad? And I realize that it might sound pedantic and silly to ask these questions, but it's actually really important. Because if you ask vague questions, you'll tend to get vague answers. And people will say answers that sound like real answers, but aren't. For example, well, I like Dark Souls because it has really good level design. And that's not necessarily wrong, but it's not very specific and doesn't really mean anything. And it's not something that you can take and then apply later. It's not something that provides any kind of learning for someone who's trying to be a better level designer. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have people that talk about designer intent, which is all about like, well, what did the creators of this game intend for us to think and feel about this thing? And that's just as obtuse because you can't actually determine that with any degree of reliability. Even if you have the designers with you, it's possible that they're conflating what actually is happening with what they were trying to create, and it doesn't always come together in the way that you'd expect. But ultimately, even if you do know exactly what the authors intended, you still can't necessarily say it's good or bad because what about something that really resonates with people, even if what resonates with people isn't what the authors intended? And you need to find a middle ground somewhere that accounts for all of these things that still allows you the ability to learn as much as possible from the material that you're trying to deconstruct. And ultimately, the best way to do that is just clear criteria. You take an experience and then you see if that's common. You see if that's the experience that other people had. And you can do that with a lot of methods. I like to watch a lot of Let's Plays. I like to play a game and then watch a lot of Let's Plays and see, are people having the same kinds of reactions as I did when I played? And that's really interesting and valuable to me because then I can go back and go, okay, a lot of people are having this specific reaction in this specific scenario. Let's really break down why that is what's happening. And the reason that's such a good focus is because it doesn't matter if that's what the author intended to happen, because that's what's consistently happening. So instead, what we can do is we can look at what has been done, how the system works together, and how that creates a particular experience. That allows us to deconstruct it in a way that we can then learn from. And as designers and developers, we can then say, okay, well, I want to create that experience, and here's one example of when that experience was created. It's very useful to not have to have authorial intent to guide your process at all. So that's my overview for why we look at things the way we do. In the next video, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about how we actually do that, and what my process is for doing that, and what kinds of results we can expect to see when we apply this process.